My son hit me in the face and disappeared for 3 years. He returned for his mother's funeral and shouted, "I am her son! Half of the business is mine." I smiled silently. The lawyer opened the will and asked my son only one question. My son's face turned pale, and he ran away again, losing everything forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you were listening in the comments. The oak table had good bones. I could see it through 40 years of water stains and cigarette burns. The craftsmanship somebody put into it back in 1940. Something. My hands moved steady across the grain, the sandpaper whispering against wood. February light came thin through the workshop windows, and I'd been at this 3 hours straight. My back ached some, but I didn't mind. This was the work that made sense to me. The door banged open. I didn't look up right away, just kept my rhythm going, dust floating gold in the afternoon sun. "Dad, I need 50,000. It's an investment opportunity, time sensitive." Hubert's voice cut through my concentration like a blade. I set down the sandpaper, brushed my palms against my work apron, and turned around slow. My son stood in the doorway with Amber just behind him, her arms crossed tight. His face had that look, jaw set hard, eyes not quite meeting mine. "Investment in what?" I asked. "Does it matter?" Amber spoke up, sharp. "It's a good opportunity. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." I untied my apron, folded it deliberate over the workbench edge. Hubert shifted his weight, impatient. He wore an expensive jacket I didn't recognize, probably something he couldn't afford. "I've given you money 5 times, Hubert. Over 120,000 total. Not $1 came back." "That's different." "How's it different?" I kept my voice level, the same tone I'd use explaining a dovetail joint to an apprentice. "Each time, you said it was urgent. Each time, you'd pay me back. Each time, nothing." His face went red. "You're sitting on millions while I struggle. You call yourself a father? Your mother and I built that security over 40 years. We worked. You got lucky." Hubert's voice cracked higher. "You bought property when it was cheap. I don't have those advantages. You won't help your own son?" Amber touched his arm, steering him. "Hubert, tell him about the opportunity, the timeline." But Hubert wasn't listening to her now. His eyes fixed on me with something I'd never seen before, pure hate maybe, or desperation so deep it looked the same. "You know what your problem is?" he said. "You think because you sand old furniture, that makes you wise. But you're just cheap, selfish, hoarding money while I'm drowning." "You're not drowning," I said, quiet. "You're spending. There's a difference. Don't lecture me. Then don't ask me to finance your life anymore." I heard the words come out calm, final. "Maybe it's time you stood on your own feet, built something yourself." The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. Hubert's breathing got heavy, his shoulders rising. Amber's hand dropped from his arm. "You never believed in me," he shouted. His fist came fast. I saw it coming, but couldn't move quick enough. 67 isn't 40. Doesn't matter how much you want it to be. His knuckles caught my cheekbone, snapped my head sideways. I stumbled backward into the workbench, felt tools scatter and clatter across concrete, heard metal ringing against stone. My hip hit the table edge hard. The workshop spun. I tasted copper, felt warmth spreading across my lower lip. When my vision cleared, Hubert stood frozen, staring at his own hand like it belonged to somebody else. "Hubert, come on, we're leaving now." Amber's voice cut through, urgent and cold. She grabbed his jacket, pulled him toward the door. He didn't resist, just let himself be moved like a puppet. The door slammed. Engine started outside, tires on gravel, fading fast. I stayed down, one hand braced against the floor, the other touching my face. My fingers came away red. The split on my lip burned, and I could feel swelling starting under my left eye. A chisel lay near my knee, a hammer by my foot. The antique table sat patient above me, half restored, waiting. The light through the windows hadn't changed much. Maybe 5 minutes had passed, start to finish. 5 minutes to break something that took 38 years to build. I pressed my palm against the concrete, pushed myself up slow. Every joint complained. There was blood on the floor now, dark drops against the dust. I touched my lip again, gentle, testing. It would need ice. My cheek throbbed where his ring had caught skin. The workshop felt different now, too quiet. The table looked different too, less like a project, more like evidence of a world that didn't exist anymore. The world where I believed my son had limits, where family meant something that couldn't be broken with fists. I walked to the window, looked out at the empty driveway. They were gone. Of course they were gone. Amber would be telling him it was my fault, that I pushed him to it. And Hubert would believe her, because believing her was easier than looking at what he'd become. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass. Old man, blood on his face, standing alone in a workshop full of tools and broken things. I touched the window frame, felt the solid wood under my fingers. Everything I'd built in this place, everything I'd taught myself, everything I'd made with these hands, the taste of blood in my mouth was bitter, metallic, real. I understood something then, clear as the February light cutting through dust. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't fixable. My son had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. Not for him, not for me. The oak table could wait. The night didn't bring sleep, just hours of staring at the ceiling while my face pulsed with pain. I'd cleaned the blood off, pressed ice against the swelling, swallowed 2 aspirin, but my mind wouldn't stop working, turning over what happened like examining a joint that wouldn't fit right. Morning came gray through the bedroom windows. I got up slow, every muscle stiff, and walked to the bathroom. The mirror showed the damage clear. Purple bruise spreading under my left eye, lips swollen and split. A cut on my cheekbone where his ring caught. I looked like I'd been in a bar fight. At 67, that wasn't a good look. I pulled out my phone, positioned myself in the light, and started taking photographs. Multiple angles, close-ups of each injury. The camera flash made the bruising look worse, which was accurate. I wanted accuracy. I took 20 pictures, maybe more. Then I walked down the hall to the guest room where Hubert had been staying. Empty, completely stripped. The bed bare, closet door hanging open with nothing inside. Not a sock or a hanger, dresser drawers pulled out and abandoned empty. He'd packed in the night and run. Didn't leave a note, didn't wake me, just vanished like a tenant skipping rent. I stood in the doorway, taking in the absence. This was my son. This was the boy I'd taught to hold a hammer, to measure twice and cut once, to take responsibility for his mistakes. This was what he'd become, someone who hits his father, then runs. I pulled out my phone and tried calling him. It rang once, then cut to an automated message. The person you're trying to reach cannot accept calls right now. I tried again. Same thing. He'd blocked me. The anger that rose up then wasn't hot, wasn't explosive like Hubert's. It was cold, clear, focused. I recognized the feeling from years back, from business deals gone wrong, from people who thought an old craftsman could be cheated. I knew how to work with this feeling. I knew how to be patient. Around 9, someone knocked. I opened the door to find Marcus Chen from 3 houses down, holding his coffee mug, looking uncomfortable. "Grover, I saw what happened yesterday through your workshop window. That was your son, wasn't it? I can give a statement if you need one." I measured his expression, genuine concern, no gossip hunger. Marcus was retired military, understood evidence and documentation. "I'd appreciate that," I said. "Write down what you saw, date it, sign it." "You going to the police?" "Haven't decided yet." He nodded slow. "That's your call. But I saw it clear. He hit you first, no provocation. If you need me to testify, I will." After he left, I sat at my kitchen table with coffee, thinking through the steps. Police report would mean immediate action, maybe charges, definitely drama. It would also mean Hubert playing victim, Amber spinning stories, lawyers fighting in public. My wife Claire's accounting business didn't need that kind of attention, neither did I. But there had to be consequences. There had to be a reckoning. I drove to urgent care just before lunch. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and fear. When they called me back, a young doctor with tired eyes examined my face. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her voice professional but kind. "My son. I need it documented." She didn't flinch, just wrote everything down careful. Asked questions, took notes, measured the bruising. When she finished, she handed me printed documentation, medical assessment, injury description, treatment notes. "You should file a police report," she said. "Maybe," I told her. "First, I need to understand my options." Over the next 3 weeks, I compiled everything, printed the photographs, filed the medical records, got Marcus's written statement. Then I started researching estate law, inheritance disputes, what happens when family turns violent. That's how I found the statute, NC Generis Stat. Paragraph 31A3, North Carolina law regarding disinheritance of heirs who commit assault. I read it 5 times, making sure I understood. I called 3 attorneys before I found Woodrow Gardner. His office sat downtown in a renovated tobacco warehouse, all exposed brick and modern furniture. Gardner himself was maybe 52, African-American like me, with silver at his temples and sharp eyes that missed nothing. I spread my evidence across his desk, photographs, medical records, witness statement. Explained the situation plain and direct. Gardner studied everything in silence, then looked up at me. North Carolina law is specific. If you can prove assault by an heir against the testator or their spouse, that heir can be disinherited entirely. The statute is NC General Statutes Section 31A3. What you have here is solid evidence. If I file a police report, does that help or hurt? I asked. For inheritance purposes, police involvement isn't required. Civil evidence is sufficient. Keep your options open. I leaned back in the chair, feeling pieces click together. So I can wait? You can wait, Gardner confirmed. Document everything, maintain the evidence, protect your assets. When the time comes, and that time is your choice, you can act with full legal backing. How do I protect my wife's business? She built that from nothing. I won't have this mess touch her work. Gardner made notes. We can structure things carefully. Separate property concerns from personal ones. Claire's business stays protected. Your estate decisions stay private until necessary. I nodded slow, thinking it through. What about my will? Current version names Hubert as primary heir. Don't change it yet, Gardner said, his tone measured. Changing it now, right after the assault, looks reactive. Wait. Let time pass. Maintain normalcy. Then, when enough distance exists, you make your changes based on careful consideration of the documented incident. Smart, patient, strategic. I left Gardner's office with clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The evening sun hit the brick buildings orange, and I drove home thinking about time, about evidence, about revenge that didn't scream or hit or break things in anger. At home, I opened my computer and created a new folder. Documentation, February 2022. Copied all the files inside, photos, medical records, statements, notes from the attorney meeting, password protected it. Then I pulled out Claire's business documents, looked at the quarterly reports from her accounting firm. 23 years she'd built this, through recessions and competition and long nights. Hubert wouldn't touch this. He wouldn't get the chance. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet house, feeling the bruises on my face fade slowly, knowing the evidence would stay sharp forever. Patience, documentation, strategy. That's how you build something that lasts. News traveled slow but steady through the furniture trade network. Someone mentioned seeing Hubert at a job fair in Charlotte. Another time, a supplier's cousin said he'd spotted my son working retail at a mall. Each fragment painted the same picture, struggling, moving sideways, never forward. I listened, took mental notes, said nothing. That first spring after the assault, my wife and I drove to Woodrow Gardner's office every few weeks. The receptionist learned our names, started having coffee ready. Gardner would spread draft documents across his conference table, and we'd review language word by word. The disinheritance clause must be airtight, Gardner explained during one session, his reading glasses catching light. Any heir who commits assault or battery against either testator forfeits all inheritance rights. North Carolina courts have upheld these clauses consistently. My wife read each revision careful, her accountant's mind catching details I'd miss. She'd built her firm from one client to 40 over 23 years. She understood documentation, precision, the importance of every word in a binding contract. This protects everything we worked for, she said one afternoon, her finger tracing a paragraph. Not just the money, the principle. We went through 3 complete drafts. Gardner consulted case law, refined terminology, ensured every legal requirement was met. By autumn, the document was ready. The signing happened on a cold December morning. Ashley Morgan, the notary, arrived with her seal and stamp, professional and efficient. 2 witnesses, people Gardner brought in who didn't know us, didn't know our history, sat silent and attentive. Do you both understand this document and sign it freely, without coercion? Morgan asked, her voice formal and clear. Yes, my wife and I said together. 4 signatures. The notary's seal pressed firm into paper. Witnessed, dated, legally unbreakable. I placed the document in my safe that evening, next to the evidence folder that held photographs, medical records, Marcus Chen's statement. Everything documented, everything preserved. The seasons turned. My workshop stayed busy. Restoration work never stopped. People always needed furniture fixed, history saved. Word about Hubert came irregularly. He'd lost another job. He and Amber were fighting. Money problems, always money problems. I kept working. My wife kept building her business. We celebrated our anniversary, then another. On the surface, life continued normal. Underneath, we both knew what was coming. Eventually, Hubert would need something. Eventually, he'd return. "He'll come back when I'm gone," my wife said one evening, unprompted. We were in the living room, her reviewing client files, me sketching a chair repair. I looked up. "What makes you say that?" "Because that's when he'll think you're vulnerable." She didn't look away from her papers. "That's when he'll expect you to forgive everything out of loneliness." She was right. She usually was. 3 years passed like water over stone, slow, steady, changing everything while appearing to change nothing. I turned 70. My hands weren't as steady as they had been, but they still knew their work. My wife's business thrived. Hubert stayed gone. Then May arrived with heat and humidity, and the phone call every person dreads. My wife collapsed at her office on a Wednesday afternoon. Massive stroke. Her assistant called me crying, barely coherent. I drove to the hospital with my heart hammering against my ribs, hands gripping the wheel too tight. The ICU smelled like chemicals and desperation. My wife lay in the bed, tubes and monitors everywhere, her face slack on one side. They told me the damage was extensive. They used words like catastrophic and non-responsive. But she woke once, briefly. Her eyes found mine, and her mouth worked, struggling. I leaned close, my ear near her lips. "Promise me," she whispered, each word costing her. "Protect what we built together. Don't let him destroy it." "I promise," I said, my voice steady even though my chest was breaking. "I promise." She died the next morning, just after dawn. 65 years old, gone. I handled the arrangements mechanically, funeral home, obituary, service details. A simple ceremony, the way she'd wanted. I didn't expect Hubert to attend. Why would he? He hadn't called in 3 years, hadn't written, hadn't existed as a son since the day his fist hit my face. The funeral came and went. Colleagues from her business, clients, friends from church filled the space. I shook hands, accepted condolences, moved through the day like a man underwater. After everyone left, I drove home alone. The house felt enormous and silent. I walked through the rooms, seeing her everywhere. At the kitchen table with spreadsheets, in the living room with her reading glasses and client files, in the workshop doorway asking when I'd come inside for dinner. I sat at the dining table where she used to work and pulled out her business documents, the accounting firm's quarterly reports, the list of active clients, the succession plan she'd drafted 2 years ago, preparing for retirement that would never come. Then I opened the safe in my study, pulled out the will, read through it one more time, seeing her signature next to mine, Ashley Morgan's notary seal embossed into the paper. My wife's voice echoed in my head. "Don't let him destroy it." I wouldn't. I'd made a promise. And I'd spent 3 years building the legal fortress to keep it. The wait was almost over. I could feel it, that change in the air before a storm breaks. Hubert would come soon. Grief brings vultures. And he'd smell opportunity in my loss. I was ready. The week after the funeral moved like cold honey. I sorted my wife's papers, contacted her business partners about transition plans, answered sympathy cards that arrived daily. The house stayed quiet except for the tick of the hallway clock and my footsteps on hardwood floors. I was in the living room, organizing client files when the doorbell rang. Early afternoon, sun coming harsh through the windows. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the front door glass, I saw Hubert and Amber beside him. 2 large suitcases sat on the porch behind them. My hand stayed steady on the doorknob. I opened it slow, taking in details. Hubert looked older, lines around his eyes, gray starting at his temples, something worn in his posture. 3 years does that. Struggle does that. "Dad?" His voice cracked slightly. "I'm so sorry about Mom. And I'm sorry about About everything 3 years ago. I was a fool. I stood in the doorway, silent, just looked at him. At them, the silence stretched. Hubert's rehearsed words hung in the air, waiting for my response. I gave him nothing. Amber shifted, impatient. Where should we put our things? We'll need to stay a few weeks at least. There's so much to handle with Mom's business and estate. I stepped back, held the door wider. Guest room, upstairs. They moved past me, hauling luggage across the threshold. I watched them climb the stairs, heard the guest room door open. The same room Hubert had emptied in rage 3 years ago. I'd refurnished it eventually. New bed, new dresser, new curtains. But it was the same space, full circle, history repeating with different props. I returned to the living room, resumed sorting papers, heard them moving around upstairs, unpacking, settling in like they belonged. Their voices carried through the vents, muffled conversation, Amber's sharper tone cutting through Hubert's softer replies. Around 6, I made dinner. Nothing fancy, baked chicken, rice, green beans. Cooking for 3 felt strange after a week alone. I set the table methodical, 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses of water. They came down when I called. Hubert had changed clothes, trying to look presentable. Amber wore makeup now, playing some role she thought appropriate. "This looks wonderful," Hubert said, pulling out a chair. "Too enthusiastic, too false. Thank you for letting us stay." I sat at the head of the table, the position I'd held for 40+ years. Started eating. They watched me, then began eating too. "How are you holding up?" Hubert tried again. "This must be incredibly difficult." I cut chicken, chewed, swallowed. "I'm managing. If there's anything we can do to help," there isn't. Amber cleared her throat. "We should talk about Mom's business, the accounting firm. There are clients who need continuity, right? Maybe I could help with the transition. I have some experience with bookkeeping." I looked at her directly for the first time. "It's handled. But surely it's handled." She fell silent. Hubert pushed rice around his plate. The only sounds were silverware against ceramic, the kitchen clock ticking, ice settling in glasses. Hubert tried once more. Has Mom's will been read yet? When will that happen?" I set down my fork, met his eyes, saw what was underneath the concern, calculation, anticipation, greed barely masked. "Next week, attorney's office, Wednesday at 2. Something passed between him and Amber, quick, like a signal. They both relaxed slightly, as if the information they had really come for had finally been delivered. We finished eating in near silence. I cleared the table, washed dishes by hand while they disappeared back upstairs. Heard the guest room door close, their voices rising and falling in conversation. I dried the dishes slow, put everything away in its place, wiped down the counters. Routine movements that let my mind work. Around 11, I walked upstairs to my bedroom, past the guest room. Their door wasn't quite closed. A sliver of light showed through the gap. I paused just for a moment. Amber's voice carried clear. "The business alone is worth $2 million. Half of that is rightfully his. He's her son." Hubert replied, lower. "We need to be patient. Let him grieve. Then we talk about what's fair." "Fair? We deserve this. After everything?" "I know. Just a few more days." I moved on, continued to my own room, closed the door behind me. Sat on the edge of the bed my wife and I had shared for decades. The mattress felt too big now, too empty. But I wasn't thinking about emptiness. I was thinking about the conversation I'd just overheard, the mercenary arithmetic of their return. Everything I'd suspected, confirmed in whispered words they thought I couldn't hear. I walked to my study, opened the safe, pulled out the will, the evidence folder, spread them on my desk under the lamplight. Photographs of my bruised face, medical records, witness statements, the will with its ironclad disinheritance clause, my wife's signature beside mine, the notary's seal official and permanent. Wednesday at 2, 1 week away. They thought they were waiting for an inheritance. They thought grief made me vulnerable, isolated, ready to forgive anything for family connection. They had no idea what they were walking into. I placed everything back in the safe, locked it carefully, returned to my bedroom. The house settled around me, quiet except for their muffled voices, still discussing money, percentages, what they were owed. Let them plan, let them calculate, let them count their unhatched chickens. Wednesday would come soon enough. By the fourth morning, they'd stopped pretending. I came downstairs to find Amber at the kitchen table, papers spread everywhere, calculator clicking under her fingers. Hubert sat across from her drinking coffee, nodding as she pointed at numbers she'd written. "The business is worth at least $2 million. I checked comparable sales," she said, not bothering to lower her voice when I entered. "The house, another $800,000. Hubert has a right to half as her son." I started the coffee maker, pulled eggs from the refrigerator, moved like they weren't there. Hubert cleared his throat. "Dad, you understand Mom would have wanted me to have my share, right? I'm her only child." I cracked eggs into the pan, watched them sizzle and whiten, didn't turn around. "She built that business for family," Hubert continued, his voice taking on a rehearsed quality. "For legacy. It wouldn't be right for you to keep everything when you weren't here for 3 years." I said it quiet, still facing the stove. "You didn't call when she was sick. Didn't come to say goodbye." The kitchen went silent except for eggs cooking. Then Hubert's chair scraped back hard. "I was busy, but I'm here now, and I want what belongs to me by right." I turned, spatula in hand. Looked at my son, face red, jaw tight. That same rage I'd seen 3 years ago starting to surface again. Amber sat very still, watching us both, her calculator forgotten. "We can take this to court if necessary," Amber said, her voice cool and measured. "We have excellent attorneys. Children have inheritance rights in this state." I plated my eggs, poured coffee, sat at the head of the table. Started eating while they stared at me, waiting for a reaction they weren't going to get. "The will reading is tomorrow," I said finally. "You'll learn everything then." I finished breakfast, washed my plate, and walked out. Left them sitting there with their papers and calculations and entitled anger. The rest of the day, they occupied the living room like conquerors planning their spoils. I heard fragments as I moved through the house. Amber's sharp voice discussing whether to sell the business immediately or keep it for steady income. Hubert arguing about paying off debts first, both of them counting money they didn't have yet. I went to my workshop, sanded an old chair that needed refinishing. The repetitive motion, the smell of wood and varnish, the simple act of making something better, it centered me. Through the window, I could see them in the house, animated conversation, hands gesturing. They thought they'd won already. Thought grief made me weak, made me willing to share what my wife and I had built. Evening came. I made dinner, simple pasta, nothing special. They ate quickly, barely tasting it, then disappeared back upstairs. I heard the guest room door close, their voices rising and falling in that private space they believed was truly private. I climbed the stairs later, moved quiet down the hallway, paused outside their door. It hung slightly ajar, light spilling through the gap. "We should sell the business immediately, take the cash." Amber's voice sharp and certain. 2 years maximum, and we'll have spent it all in Charlotte anyway. "What about the house?" Hubert asked. "Sell it too. The market's good right now. We could clear everything within 6 months, walk away with close to $3 million after taxes. He might fight us on some of it. Let him try. He's 70 years old and just lost his wife. How hard can he fight?" Their laughter drifted through the gap, casual, dismissive, certain of their victory. I continued to my bedroom, closed the door behind me, sat on the edge of the bed in darkness, listening to the house settle around me, their muffled voices still audible through walls and vents, planning and scheming and dividing what they thought was theirs. Tomorrow, Wednesday at 2. I walked to my study, opened the safe, pulled out the evidence folder, photographs of my bruised face, medical records, Marcus Chen's witness statement. The police report I'd eventually filed months later for additional documentation. 3 years of patience, preserved in paper and ink and legal language. Beneath it, the will, my wife's signature next to mine, Ashley Morgan's notary seal, Woodrow Gardner's precise legal clauses protecting everything we'd built. I spread it all on my desk, reviewed it one final time. Every document in order, every detail verified, every legal requirement met with surgical precision. From the guest room, Amber's voice carried faint but clear. "By this time next month, we'll be planning that vacation, somewhere expensive." I gathered the documents, returned them to the safe, locked it carefully. Tomorrow, they'd sit in Gardner's conference room, expecting validation, expecting inheritance, expecting their planning to become reality. They had no idea what was coming. I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the dark street, the familiar neighborhood I'd lived in for 40 years. My wife and I had chosen this house together, had worked side by side to make it ours. She'd died trusting me to protect what we'd built. Tomorrow, I'd keep that promise. The house went quiet eventually. Their voices stopped. Lights went out. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, not sleeping, but not restless either. Just waiting. Patient. The way I'd waited 3 years. The way a craftsman waits for wood to cure properly before finishing it. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, everything would change. Hubert would learn what it cost to raise your fist against your father. Amber would learn that greed doesn't guarantee reward. And I would learn what justice felt like after 3 years of preparation. I closed my eyes, finally, and let sleep come. Wednesday morning crawled. I made coffee, read the newspaper, moved through my routine with the same steady pace I'd maintained for 3 years. Hubert and Amber stayed upstairs until nearly noon, then came down dressed like they were attending something important, which I suppose they thought they were. "Should we all ride together?" Hubert asked, keys in hand. "I'll drive myself," I said. I left first, took the familiar route downtown. The streets of Asheville passed by my windows. Same buildings, same storefronts, same mountains in the distance. Everything looked exactly as it had yesterday, would look exactly the same tomorrow, but today was different. Today, 3 years of patience ended. I parked on the street, fed the meter, walked into the renovated tobacco warehouse that held Gardner's office. The elevator rose smooth and quiet. 3rd floor. The receptionist recognized me, smiled professionally. "Conference room B, Mr. Spencer. They're ready for you." The room smelled like leather and old paper. Mahogany table, high-backed chairs, law books lining one wall. Woodrow Gardner sat at the head of the table in a dark suit, papers organized before him. Ashley Morgan occupied a chair to his right, notary seal and stamp visible beside her hand. I took a seat on one side of the table, set my briefcase on the floor, folded my hands on the polished wood surface. 5 minutes later, Hubert and Amber arrived. She wore a black dress, trying for respectful mourning, landing somewhere closer to eager anticipation. Hubert had on a sport coat I didn't recognize, probably borrowed or bought on credit. They sat across from me, not quite meeting my eyes. Gardner checked his watch. "We'll begin. I am Woodrow Gardner, estate attorney. I have been retained to execute the last will and testament of Claire Spencer, who passed on May 15th, 2025. Present are interested parties as required by North Carolina law." He adjusted his reading glasses, looked at each of us in turn. Ashley Morgan uncapped her pen, prepared to take notes. "Mrs. Spencer's will was executed on December the 7th, 2022, in this office, in my presence and that of Ms. Morgan, and 2 additional witnesses. It has been kept in secure storage since that date." Hubert shifted in his chair. Amber's fingers played with her wedding ring, nervous energy barely contained. Gardner opened the document, began reading. Standard legal language, preliminary statements, declarations of sound mind, and proper execution. His voice stayed level, professional, betraying nothing. Then he reached the substantive provisions. "I hereby bequeath and devise all my business interests, including Spencer Accounting Services and all associated assets, together with all real property located at," he listed our home address, "and all financial accounts, investments, and personal property totaling approximately $2.7 million to my husband, Grover Spencer, to be his absolutely and in perpetuity." Silence, just for a heartbeat. Then Hubert's chair shrieked against the floor. He shot upright, hands slamming on the table. "Stop! What about me? I'm her son. I have the right to half." Amber stood too, her voice rising sharp and high. "This is illegal. Children have mandatory inheritance portions. You can't just—" Gardner raised one hand, just lifted it, palm out, and somehow that simple gesture commanded more authority than any shouting could. The room fell silent. "Please," Gardner said, his tone unchanged, professional, cool, utterly unruffled. "Let me finish." Hubert remained standing, breathing hard, face flushed. Amber gripped the back of her chair, knuckles white. I sat perfectly still. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. Gardner looked across the table at my son. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were ice cold. Professional distance mixed with something harder. Judgment, maybe. Or just the satisfaction of a job done correctly. "Mr. Hubert Spencer," Gardner said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "Before I continue reading this document, I must ask you one question." The conference room held its breath. Ashley Morgan's pen hovered above paper. Amber's fingers froze on the chair back. Hubert stared at Gardner, confusion and anger warring across his features. Gardner didn't break eye contact, didn't blink, just held that cold, professional stare. I felt the smallest smile curve my lips. Couldn't help it. This was the moment. 3 years of waiting, 3 years of documentation, 3 years of building the perfect legal trap. And now, the trap was about to spring shut. Hubert swallowed hard. What question?" Gardner leaned forward slightly, his voice precise and measured, every word a nail being driven home. "Mr. Spencer," he said, "on February 18th, 2022, did you strike your father, Grover Spencer, in the face with sufficient force to cause injury requiring medical treatment?" The silence that followed was absolute, total. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Hubert's face went from red to white in seconds. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. Amber turned to look at him, genuine shock replacing calculation in her expression. "Hubert?" Gardner's hand rested on a folder I recognized. My evidence folder. The one I'd brought to his office 3 years ago. Photographs, medical records, witness statements. Everything documented, everything preserved. "I'll ask again," Gardner said, his voice unchanged, clinical and precise. "Did you commit assault and battery against your father on that date?" Hubert looked at me for the first time since the reading began. Really looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the moment he understood. The moment he realized what I'd done, what I'd been planning all along, what he'd walked into, blind and greedy and utterly unprepared. The silence stretched. Gardner let it hang there, building weight, becoming unbearable. Then he spoke again, slower this time, each word precisely enunciated. "Mr. Hubert Spencer, did you commit an act of physical violence against the testator, Grover Spencer, in February of 2022? Hubert's face drained of color, actually drained. I watched the blood leave his cheeks, watched his skin go from flushed red to ash gray in seconds. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That was—" His voice came out strangled. It was just an argument that got heated." Amber's head snapped toward him. "What is he talking about?" Gardner reached for the manila folder, opened it with deliberate care, began placing photographs on the table, one by one, each image landing with the weight of a gavel strike. My face. February 2022. Black eye, purple and swollen, split lip, dried blood visible. Facial bruising across my cheekbone where his ring had caught. Multiple angles. Timestamp visible on each image. Undeniable. According to medical documentation, photographic evidence, and witness testimony from Robert Mills, your father's neighbor, you struck your father across the face, causing contusions, lacerations, and documented injury requiring medical treatment. Is this accurate? Amber grabbed the folder, her hands shaking, flipped through the pages. Photographs. Then the medical report, urgent care letterhead, physician's notes, description of injuries. Then Robert Mills's handwritten statement, signed and dated, describing exactly what he witnessed through my workshop window. Her face went gray. She looked at Hubert like she'd never seen him before. "You told me it was nothing," she whispered. "You said you'd pushed him, a shove. You said he forgave you." Hubert looked at me, then at the evidence, then back at Gardner. "It was 3 years ago. It doesn't matter now." Gardner's expression didn't change. Professional, detached, cold as winter stone. Under North Carolina General Statutes, Section 31A.3, any individual who commits assault, battery, or violence against a testator or their spouse is automatically disqualified from receiving any inheritance from that testator's estate. The words landed like hammer blows, each syllable precisely placed. Hubert stared at him. "What?" "The law is unambiguous," Gardner continued. "A person who feloniously and intentionally causes bodily harm to a testator forfeits all rights to inherit from the testator. The statute exists specifically to prevent violent individuals from profiting from their violence. But there was no arrest, no charges. He never went to the police. Criminal prosecution is not required. Civil evidence is sufficient. The photographs, medical documentation, and witness statement constitute proof beyond reasonable doubt. Amber was still flipping through the evidence folder, her movements getting more frantic. She pulled out another document, the timeline I'd compiled, showing 5 previous unpaid loans totaling over $120,000. Dates, amounts, purposes listed in Hubert's own emails requesting money. "You've been borrowing from them for years," she said, her voice hollow. "You never told me it was this much." Hubert reached for her. "Amber!" She jerked away from his touch. Gardner gathered the photographs, aligned them precisely. Mrs. Spencer's will was executed in December 2022, 10 months after the assault occurred. Both testators were fully aware of the incident and its legal implications when they signed. The disinheritance is intentional, documented, and legally unassailable. I watched my son's face as understanding finally penetrated. Really penetrated. He'd walked into this office expecting $2 million, expected to argue about percentages, maybe negotiate terms. He'd planned what he'd spend, where he'd go, how he'd finally escape the consequences of his own failures. Instead, he was getting nothing. Zero. The mathematical absolute of his greed's reward. "This can't be legal," Hubert said, but his voice had lost conviction. "There has to be some kind of statute of limitations, or..." "There is no statute of limitations for inheritance disqualification in North Carolina," Gardner said. "The law exists specifically to ensure that violent acts against testators cannot be forgotten or forgiven through the passage of time alone." Amber stood abruptly, her chair scraping loud against the floor. She was still holding the evidence folder, gripping it so tight the manila crumpled. She looked at Hubert with something beyond anger. Betrayal, maybe. Or just the cold calculation of someone realizing they'd bet everything on a losing hand. "You swore to me this was fixed," she said, her voice shaking. "You swore he'd forgiven you. That's why we came back, because you said your mother's death meant a fresh start, a second chance. I thought... You didn't think. You never think." She threw the folder down on the table, photographs scattering. "You hit your own father, and then you lied to me about it for 3 years." Hubert's hands were trembling now. He looked at me across the table, and I looked back, met his eyes directly. Let him see exactly what I was thinking, what I'd been planning since the day his fist connected with my face. This moment, this exact moment. 3 years of patience, compressed into one perfect afternoon of justice. Gardner carefully collected the scattered photographs, returned them to the folder. Ashley Morgan made a note in her record book, her pen scratching across paper, the only sound in the room. "The will stands as written and executed," Gardner said. "All assets to Grover Spencer. No provision for Hubert Spencer beyond what is legally required." "What's legally required?" Hubert asked, grasping at anything. $1, for purposes of legal sufficiency, to demonstrate you were not accidentally omitted from the will. $1, the number hung in the air. 3 years of waiting, $2.7 million in assets, and my son would receive exactly $1. Hubert lurched forward in his chair, hands gripping the table edge. "Wait, can't we challenge this? Take it to court? There has to be some way." "You can certainly attempt to challenge the will," Gardner said, his tone unchanged. "However, I should inform you that the will contains a no-contest clause. Any legal challenge filed by you automatically forfeits even the $1 bequest. You would receive absolutely nothing." The trap was perfect, every exit blocked, every escape route sealed. Hubert's mouth worked soundlessly, his hands pressed flat against the mahogany surface, fingers splayed wide like he was trying to hold on to something solid while everything else collapsed beneath him. 3 years, he finally managed. 3 years have passed. This can't matter now. Why didn't you call the police if it was so serious? I'd been silent through all of this, watching, waiting, but now I leaned forward, let my voice carry across the table, cold, controlled, final. I didn't need the police. I needed time. Time to document everything. Time to build an unbreakable case. Time to let you show exactly who you are. Hubert stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You came back here 1 week after your mother died, I continued. You never asked how she died, never asked if she suffered, never asked what her last words were. You asked about the will, about money, about what you'd inherit. I was grieving. You were calculating. My voice stayed level, but each word landed like a judge's ruling. I heard you through the guest room door, heard you and Amber planning how to spend it all, selling the business your mother built from nothing, selling the house we chose together 40 years ago. You were dividing up her life's work before she was cold in the ground. Amber made a sound, half gasp, half sob. She turned to Hubert, her face twisted with fury. You swore that slap was nothing. You told me he'd forgiven you. You said we just needed to show up and act sorry. I thought he would have forgotten. Forgotten? I let the word hang there. I've forgotten nothing. Not the 5 loans you never repaid, not the 3 years you stayed away, not the contempt in your voice when you demanded that last 50,000, and definitely not the moment your fist hit my face. Hubert turned to me, desperation replacing calculation. He reached across the table with both hands, palms up, pleading. Dad, please, I'm sorry. I was completely wrong. I've been wrong about everything. Can't we forget this whole thing? Start over? I looked at his outstretched hands, looked at his face, the face so similar to mine, carrying half my blood, completely devoid of my values, and I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. Just the cold satisfaction of a job completed correctly. No, I said simply. We can't. Gardner cleared his throat. For the record, Mr. Spencer, even if your father wished to change the will now, doing so under these circumstances, with you present making requests, could be considered coercion. The will stands, the law supports it. The decision is final. But the statute, there must be some kind of limitation. There is no statute of limitations for inheritance disqualification in North Carolina, Gardner repeated. The law specifically allows testators to disinherit heirs who commit violence against them, regardless of when that violence occurred or whether criminal charges were filed. Documentary evidence of the violent act is sufficient, which we have. Extensively. He tapped the manila folder. My evidence, 3 years of careful documentation. Unbreakable. Hubert looked at Amber. Amber looked at the folder. Then she looked at her husband with pure disgust. I quit my job to come here, she said, her voice shaking with rage. I left Charlotte, left my apartment, gave notice. Because you swore this was guaranteed. You swore we'd walk out of here with millions. I didn't know. How could I know he'd... You knew you hit him. You knew it was serious. You just thought he was too weak or too stupid to do anything about it. She was right. That's exactly what he'd thought. That grief would make me pliable. Loneliness would make me desperate. Age would make me forgiving. He'd miscalculated on every count. Gardner began gathering his documents. Unless there are further questions, this concludes the reading of the will. Mr. Grover Spencer, if you could remain for a moment to sign some transfer paperwork. Mr. and Mrs. Spencer, he looked at Hubert and Amber. You're free to go. Free to go. With nothing, less than nothing, with the knowledge that they'd gambled everything on a hand I'd been planning to beat for 3 years. Hubert stood slowly, like an old man, like me, but I'd earned my age through work and patience and building things that lasted. He'd earned his through entitlement and shortcuts and burning bridges. We're leaving, he said to Amber, not to me. Didn't even look at me. She grabbed her purse, stood with her chair scraping harsh against the floor. They walked to the door. Hubert's hand on the knob. He paused, half-turned. For 1 second I thought he might say something. Apologize, maybe. Or curse me. Or finally acknowledge what he'd done. But he didn't. Just opened the door and walked out, Amber right behind him. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway, fast, almost running, fleeing. The door closed. Silence flooded the conference room like water into a hull. Gardner looked at me across the table. That went exactly as expected. Yes, I said. It did. Ashley Morgan was closing her record book, capping her pen. Professional, efficient. She'd witnessed the complete destruction of a man's inheritance and showed no more emotion than if she'd been notarizing a property deed, which, I supposed, she basically had been. The transfer documents are straightforward, Gardner said, pulling out another folder. The business assets, the house, the accounts, Everything transfers to you outright. Claire's estate planning was meticulous. She was always meticulous, I said quietly. Through the window, I could see the parking lot below, watched Hubert and Amber emerge from the building, walking fast toward their car. Watched them get in. Watched the car pull out, too quickly, tires squealing slightly. Gone. I turned back to Gardner and the paperwork that would make official what had already been true for 3 years. Justice isn't always fast. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it waits and watches and documents everything. And sometimes it's perfect. The first attorney listened for 20 minutes before stopping Hubert mid-sentence. Mr. Spencer, I'd be stealing your money if I took this case. North Carolina General Statutes, Section 31A3 is explicit. The evidence against you is documented and witnessed. You'd spend $15,000 to $20,000 in legal fees for an outcome that's already determined. You lose. The second attorney was more diplomatic, but reached the same conclusion within the first consultation. The third didn't even let Hubert finish explaining before pulling up the statute on his computer screen and reading it aloud. 3 weeks in July, 3 attorneys, 3 identical verdicts. Hopeless. My phone started ringing the day after their second attorney consultation. I was in my workshop, refinishing a dining chair, when Hubert's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring. He called back an hour later. Then again that evening. On the 4th call, I answered. "What do you want, Hubert?" His voice came through tight, controlled. "I want to talk. Like adults. We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out. You can't just cut me off completely. I'm your son." I set down my sandpaper, wiped my hands on my work apron. "Is that what you think you are?" Silence on his end. Then, "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been calling yourself my son for 3 years while acting like a stranger. Actions matter more than words, Hubert. You taught me that when your fist hit my face. That was a mistake. I've apologized." "No," I said quietly. "You've asked for money. There's a difference." He tried a different tactic, pleading. His voice cracked, went soft. "Dad, please. I made a terrible mistake. I know I did. But I'm asking you, begging you, give me another chance. I gave you chances, 5 times before February 2022. Over $120,000 in chances. Each time, you promised to change. Each time, you came back asking for more. I'll pay you back, I swear. Just help me now and I'll..." "With what?" I asked. "You have no job, no money, no prospects. And according to the attorneys you've been consulting, no inheritance. What exactly will you use to pay me back?" The line went quiet. He hadn't expected me to know about the attorneys. "That's right," I continued. "Asheville's a small town. Attorneys talk. I know you've been shopping for someone to challenge the will. Let me save you time and money. You won't find one. You planned this." His voice changed, went hard. "You set me up. I documented your assault. There's a difference. You set yourself up the moment you raised your hand against me. 3 years ago. Ancient history. Not to North Carolina law, not to the medical records, not to the photographs, not to Robert Mills, who watched through my workshop window and wrote down everything he saw." Another silence, longer this time. "Your mother knew," I said, letting the words land heavy. "About the assault, about your history of borrowing and never repaying, about why you really came back after she died. She worked with me on the will, Hubert. Sat in Woodrow Gardner's office, read every clause, signed every page. The disinheritance wasn't my idea alone. It was ours, together. Protecting 40 years of work from someone who wanted to tear it down in 40 seconds. I don't believe you. Believe what you want. The will stands either way. Your mother's final wish was that I protect what we built. I'm fulfilling that wish." I hung up. He called back immediately. I didn't answer. He called 6 more times that day, 3 the next, then twice daily for a week. I stopped answering completely. The divorce papers arrived at his motel. I heard about it from a furniture supplier whose cousin worked at the front desk. Amber's attorney filed in, Charlotte, citing intentional misrepresentation of financial circumstances as grounds. She wanted half of his expected inheritance. Half of nothing is nothing. Hubert called one more time after that, late at night. Probably after a few drinks based on how his words slurred together. "You destroyed my marriage. You destroyed everything." I was still awake, reading in bed. picked up the phone this time. Felt like he needed to hear it stated plain. I didn't destroy your marriage, Hubert. Your lies did. Amber married you thinking you'd inherit millions. You let her believe that even though you'd assaulted me and disappeared for 3 years. You gambled on my forgiveness without ever earning it. You're cruel. That's what you are. A cruel old man. No, I said. I'm a father who documented his son's violence and ensured it had consequences. That's not cruelty. That's justice. She's taking everything. The car, the furniture, half the savings You mean half the savings from the loans I gave you that you never repaid? He had no answer for that. You made your choices, Hubert. Now you're living with them. That's how life works. Actions have consequences. You just thought yours wouldn't catch up to you. I ended the call, turned off my phone, went to sleep easier than I had in years. The next week, I heard through the same supplier's cousin that Hubert sold his car. Needed money for attorney fees, apparently. The divorce was progressing. Amber wanted everything documented, every asset accounted for, every debt revealed. She'd discover the same thing I had 3 years ago. Hubert had nothing but debt and excuses. By late July, the calls stopped completely. Either he'd given up or couldn't afford phone service anymore. Didn't matter which. I stood in my workshop one afternoon, organizing tools, preparing for a new project. Sunlight came through the windows the way it always had. Wood shavings on the floor, smell of varnish in the air. Everything exactly as it should be. My wife's photograph sat on the shelf above my workbench. Both of us young, standing in front of this same workshop 40 years ago. Her smile bright, my arm around her shoulders. Building something together. I'd kept my promise to her. Protected what we built. Ensured our legacy couldn't be stolen by someone who thought family obligation meant automatic forgiveness. Justice wasn't quick, but it was thorough. And it was final. August brought heat and clarity. I spent mornings in the workshop, working on a cherrywood cabinet that had been waiting 2 months for my attention. The wood was good, dense grain, rich color, the kind that improves with age and careful handling, like most things worth keeping. The business sale finalized on a Tuesday, a Charlotte firm specializing in small accounting practices. They'd reviewed my wife's client list, met her employees, studied the books, made a fair offer that guaranteed jobs for everyone on her staff. She would have approved. The scholarship fund took longer to structure. I worked with a different attorney, not Gardner, someone who specialized in charitable trusts. We designed it specific. Annual awards for young people studying furniture making, woodworking, traditional crafts, skills that required patience and precision, things that couldn't be rushed or faked. My wife's name on every certificate, her legacy continuing in ways that mattered. My phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. Hubert's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity, maybe the need for absolute finality. Yes, I said. I'm leaving Asheville. His voice sounded hollow, defeated. Tomorrow. Going to stay with Amber's cousin in Tennessee until the divorce is final. All right. That's it? That's all you have to say? What else is there? I'm your son. The words came out desperate, grasping. That has to mean something. Blood means something. I set down the chisel I'd been holding, looked out the workshop window at the familiar street, the neighborhood I'd known for 40 years. A son doesn't raise his hand against his father, I said quietly. A son doesn't disappear for 3 years while his mother is alive and only show up after she's dead. A son doesn't ask about inheritance before asking how she died or if she suffered. I made mistakes. You made choices. There's a difference. You chose violence over conversation. You chose absence over relationship. You chose greed over family. Those weren't mistakes, Hubert. Those were decisions. Silence stretched between us. I could hear his breathing, ragged and uneven. You stopped being my son that day in February 2022, I continued. The moment your fist connected with my face, you became something else, a stranger who shares my blood. Nothing more. So that's it? You're just done with me? I was done with you 3 years ago. You just didn't realize it until now. You planned this entire thing, 3 years of planning. He struggled for words. That's cold. That's justice. You earned this outcome through your own actions. Your mother and I built something over 40 years. You tried to take it in 40 seconds. We protected it, just like we had every right to do. I have nothing now. No wife, no money, no family, nothing. You have exactly what you've always had, yourself. The difference is, now you can't hide behind my money or your mother's forgiveness or Amber's schemes. Now you have to stand on your own and figure out who you actually are. I heard him exhale, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. For what it's worth, he said, I am sorry, about hitting you, about everything. I believe you're sorry now that it cost you everything. But that's not the same as being sorry when it mattered. The line went quiet. Then, goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, Hubert. I ended the call, set the phone down on my workbench, picked up the chisel again. The cherry wood cabinet waited, patient and unchanging. I'd been working on the door panels, carving a simple pattern that would take another week to complete properly. No shortcuts, no rushing. Just careful, methodical work that would last. The afternoon light slanted through the workshop windows, catching dust motes and golden beams. Same light that had filled this space for 40 years. Same workshop where I'd taught myself the craft, where I'd built furniture for neighbors and friends, where my wife would stand in the doorway asking when I'd come inside for dinner, where my son had struck me 3 years ago. That room contained all of it: history and violence, craft and betrayal, patience and revenge. All of it woven together like the grain in good wood. You couldn't separate the dark from the light. You could only acknowledge both existed. I looked at the photograph on the wall. My wife and I, 30 years old, standing in front of this building the day we'd signed the lease. Her hand in mine. Both of us believing in possibility, in hard work, in building something that would last. We had. It had lasted. And now it was protected. The business sold. The scholarship fund established. The house paid off and mine to do with as I pleased. My son disinherited legally, permanently, justly. No loose ends, no unfinished business. Just the smooth satisfaction of a job completed correctly. I ran my hand along the cherry wood panel, feeling the grain beneath my palm. 40 years I'd been doing this. 40 years of learning that good work took time, that rushing ruined everything, that patience was its own kind of power. Justice wasn't always fast. Sometimes it waited 3 years. Sometimes it documented every detail. Sometimes it worked with attorneys and medical records and witness statements to build something unbreakable. And sometimes, at the end, it left you standing in your workshop on a Thursday afternoon in August, with good wood under your hands and peace in your chest, and the absolute certainty that everything happened exactly as it should have. I picked up the chisel again, made another careful cut, then another. Outside, life continued, traffic passing, neighbors walking dogs, the world moving forward the way it always did. Inside my workshop, I did the same, moving forward, building something, making it last, the way I'd always done, the way I always would. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.